Ethan Cole pushed the creaking garage door upward with his shoulder, muscles burning from a day that had started before sunrise. The storm clouds rolling in from the west looked like they meant business, thick and bruised, swallowing the last bits of daylight. He could smell the metallic tang of rain even before the first drop hit the cracked pavement outside. A wiser man might have closed early, but a single dad didn't get the luxury of turning away work. Not when bills piled up faster than customers walked in. Not when Lily's sneakers already had holes in them and she'd asked, too sweetly, too carefully, whether she could still go on the third-grade field trip if he needed the money for other stuff. He wiped the grease from his hands using a shop rag that probably made them dirtier, not cleaner. The garage was a familiar orchestra of clanking tools, soft radio static, and the faint smell of oil baked permanently into the concrete. He found comfort in that consistency. Cars didn't lie. They didn't say one thing and mean another. They didn't walk away. The headlights in the distance didn't immediately catch his attention. Lots of people took detours through town when the highway backed up. But the grinding sound of a heavy trailer slowing to a stop in front of his shop definitely did. No one hauled anything big to Cole's auto after dark unless they were desperate or wealthy enough not to care about inconvenience. The truck door opened and a driver jumped out, rain already soaking through his jacket. "Ethan Cole," he shouted over the distant rumble of thunder. "That's me," Ethan replied, stepping out under the awning. "Got a delivery for you. Client wants a full restoration. Says you're the only guy they trust." The driver jerked his thumb toward the trailer. The only guy they trust. Ethan almost laughed. Most days he was just the only guy who charged prices people in this town could afford. "Paperwork?" he asked instead. The driver shook his head. "Paid in full already. Instructions are inside the car." Inside the car. Odd. Most clients at least tried to talk his ear off first. Ethan walked toward the back of the trailer, boots splashing through shallow puddles. The driver unlatched the ramp and hit a switch. The mechanism whirred as the trailer door lifted, revealing a silhouette under a heavy tarp. Even covered, the thing had a presence, long, low, unmistakably classic. Ethan grabbed the tarp and pulled it back. Rain hissed off the glossy surface, and then he saw it clearly under the intermittent flashes of lightning. A 1967 Mustang Fastback. His breath hitched, his hand freezing on the tarp. Not just any Mustang, that Mustang. The dream car he and Harper used to sketch out in the margins of notebooks. Midnight blue with chrome trim, original body lines intact, the exact kind they used to promise each other they'd rebuild someday. Back before life split them in two different directions with no warning and no map back. Ethan stepped closer, fingertips hovering just above the cool metal. Someone had taken good care of it, but beneath the paint he could sense the exhaustion of decades. Worn bolts, an engine that probably hadn't been fired up properly in years, parts that needed patience and steady hands. He could fix all of that. He could bring any dying car back to life if he had the time. What he couldn't make sense of was why this car, this particular model, had shown up on his doorstep now. The driver cleared his throat, dragging Ethan out of the memories he tried not to revisit. "You need help rolling it in." Ethan nodded, shielding the car from the rain as they moved it inside the garage. The storm intensified, pounding the metal roof, but all he could hear was the thud of his heartbeat as he circled the Mustang. Again and again, something tugged at him, a familiarity too sharp to ignore. It felt like the past had driven straight into his present, uninvited, unannounced, and yet somehow exactly on time. He opened the driver's door, the hinges groaning softly, and leaned into the dim interior, searching for the paperwork the driver mentioned. The glove box stuck before popping open with a tired snap. Inside was a folded envelope, nothing else. No instructions, no client notes, no business card, just the envelope. He pulled it out slowly, rain-wet fingers trembling despite himself. The paper was cream-colored, thick, expensive, the opposite of anything he normally handled in this shop. He turned it over, and the world narrowed to a single point in front of him. Her handwriting, the looping, careful script he used to recognize even without reading the name. Harper Quinn. Ethan waited until Lily was asleep before returning to the garage, the Mustang's presence tugging at him like a half-remembered dream. The storm had passed, leaving the night washed clean, but inside him everything felt muddied and unsettled. He flicked on the hanging work light, its warm halo casting shadows across the Mustang's hood. The engine gleamed faintly where the rain hadn't dried yet, like it was holding its breath. Maybe he was too. He pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket and set it on the workbench, staring at it like it might detonate. Harper Quinn. He hadn't said her name out loud in years, hadn't let himself think it for more than a heartbeat before shoving the memory aside. That was survival. That was how you kept old wounds from reopening. But now her name was in his hands, written in the same elegant script she used to leave on the notes she slipped into his locker. The loops of the letters were distinctive, confident, a little dramatic. Harper had always believed she was meant for something bigger than this town, and he'd believed it too. He didn't open the envelope right away. Instead, he circled the Mustang, fingertips grazing the curves of the metal as if touching it might give him answers. He inspected the gaps in the body, the way the chrome trim had been polished even though it needed refitting, the careful attention someone had given to preserving its authenticity. Whoever had owned it had understood what it meant. Whoever had sent it had known that he, specifically he, would understand too. He popped the hood, the smell of old gasoline rising in a faint, comforting wave. The engine bay was familiar but worn, like a story that had been read too many times. It wasn't just a restoration job. This was a message wrapped in steel and memory. But from Harper. After everything. Why now? He closed the hood gently and returned to the workbench. The envelope sat there, still unopened, a silent dare. His hands weren't steady when he slid a finger under the seal and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. He unfolded it. No letter. No explanation. Just a set of keys taped to the center, and beneath them a single line in her handwriting. Please take care of her the way you used to take care of me. The words hit him harder than any memory. Harper had always been poetic without meaning to be. She felt things deeply, too deeply, her mother used to say. And now, this line, this car, this sudden intrusion of the past into his fragile present left him standing there breathless, like someone had punched through all the armor he'd built over the past 10 years. He sank onto the small rolling stool, elbows braced on his knees, trying to piece together the version of Harper who would send him a card tied to their old dreams. The last time he'd seen her, she'd been crying, saying she was sorry but couldn't tell him why she had to leave. Only that she had no choice. And then she was gone. No calls. No answers. Just silence and the news, years later, of her meteoric rise in the tech world, her billion-dollar company, her face on magazine covers. She existed in some galaxy far away now, untouchable, unreachable. So why send this? Why send it to him? A soft creak echoed in the garage as the building settled, startling him back into the present. He folded the note again, more carefully this time, and slipped it back into the envelope. He didn't know what Harper wanted, or whether this was some kind of closure or the beginning of something he wasn't ready to name. All he knew was that nothing in his life ever arrived without a price, and he could feel the weight of this Mustang settling onto his shoulders already, heavy with history he wasn't sure he could carry again. Harper stood just outside the garage door for a full 10 seconds before stepping in. She hadn't knocked, hadn't called out, just lingered at the threshold like she was gathering enough courage to cross into a past she'd left behind. The early morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, turning the rising motes of dust into soft gold, and for a moment Ethan wondered if he'd fallen asleep at the workbench and started dreaming. She didn't belong here. Not anymore. Not in this small town, not in his oil-stained world that had grown narrower year after year. Yet there she was, looking at him with the same eyes he remembered even though everything else about her seemed sharper, more polished, more carefully composed. He set down the wrench he'd been pretending to focus on. The Mustang's hood remained open between them, a metal barrier holding back everything neither of them had said in a decade. Harper's breath hitched slightly, barely visible except to someone who'd once memorized the shape of her nerves. Her hair, once wild and sun-streaked from long afternoons by the lake, was now styled in a smooth fall of curls that looked intentional rather than accidental. She wore jeans, simple ones, and a soft windbreaker that did nothing to hide the fact that she had grown into a woman who made powerful decisions every day. But there was a tension in her posture, something softer peeking through, something familiar. "Hi, Ethan," she said, her voice steady but too careful. Like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to say his name anymore. It knocked something loose in him, something he wished had stayed locked. He stood straighter, crossing his arms more to shield himself than anything else. You could have told me it was you, he said, surprising himself with how even his voice sounded. Calm, controlled, nothing like the storm churning in his chest. Her lips parted, then pressed together again before she answered. I didn't think you'd take the job if you knew. She was right, and they both knew it. Harper had always been good at reading him. Annoyingly good. More than anyone else, more than he'd ever let anyone else be. She looked around the garage as if trying to anchor herself. Her gaze lingered on the tool rack, the worn-out stool, the jar of bolts that Lily had decorated with stickers. Her expression softened for a split second, like the sight of something ordinary made her oddly emotional. You look good, she said quietly. Yeah, he didn't return the compliment. Couldn't. The words got stuck somewhere behind all the resentment, confusion, and leftover affection he hated admitting was still there. Harper stepped closer to the Mustang, resting her hand on the edge of the fender. Her fingers traced along the paint, slow, reverent. You kept your touch, she murmured. The bodywork already looks better than it did when I sent it. He swallowed hard. Why me, Harper? He asked finally. Why send this car? Why now? She met his eyes, and for a moment something vulnerable flickered through her polished exterior. I didn't know who else to trust, she said. Not with this. Not with anything that actually matters. He almost laughed, bitter and sharp. A lot has changed since you left. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking just slightly. That's why I'm here. The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. She stood only a few feet away now, but it felt like years stretched out between them. Years full of things she hadn't said, reasons she'd never given, apologies she probably thought would fall on deaf ears. Outside, the town began to wake. Cars on the road, a dog barking, a distant screen door slamming, but inside the garage, time felt suspended. Harper looked at him like she was trying to rebuild something far more complicated than a Mustang, and Ethan hated that a part of him still wanted to know if that was possible. Harper stayed beside the Mustang, her hand still resting lightly on the fender as if the metal might steady her. Ethan watched her fingers move, slow, tracing tiny arcs, like she was remembering something she wasn't ready to say yet. It made a knot form in his chest, one he didn't want to name. He picked up a rag, wiped his palms even though they were already clean, and tried to focus on the engine instead of the woman standing inches from the life he'd rebuilt without her. Do you want to see the progress? He asked, because talk about machinery was safer than talk about feelings. She nodded, a little too quickly. He lifted the hood again, letting it rise with a familiar groan. Harper stepped beside him, close enough that he could smell traces of her shampoo, jasmine, maybe the same kind as before, maybe not. She leaned forward, studying the engine as if she'd never left the workshop days where they used to sit cross-legged on the floor, sharing a burger while debating carburetors. You cleaned it, she murmured. All the original parts, they're still here. Barely. He tapped a hose that had seen better decades. She's tired. Needs rewiring. Fuel line is a mess. Whoever handled her before knew enough not to break things, but not enough to fix what mattered. Harper lowered her gaze. That sounds familiar. Ethan stiffened. He didn't want to talk in metaphors. Not hers. Not now. He shut the hood gently, letting the latch click into place. You said there was something you wanted to explain, he said. So explain. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped back, folding her arms around herself like she was cold, though the morning air was warm. I didn't leave because I wanted to, she began, voice softer than he remembered. The night I left, I thought I'd tell you everything. But things with my family were worse than I realized. My dad's business had collapsed. My mom was sick. We owed money to people who weren't patient or kind. I had to do something fast, something drastic. A full-ride scholarship overseas was the only offer that came with both housing and a stipend. They wanted me to leave the next morning. You still could have told me, Ethan said, jaw tight. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't wipe the tears away. If I told you, you would have tried to stop me. Or worse, you would have followed me. And I couldn't drag you into that mess. I couldn't ask you to give up your apprenticeship because of my family's mistakes. You had a future here. I was losing mine. He exhaled slowly, anger and heartbreak tangling in his chest like frayed wires. You didn't get to make that choice for me. I know, she whispered. And I've thought about that every day for 10 years. Silence filled the garage, thick and heavy. Ethan wasn't sure what to do with her confession. Part of him had wanted answers, part of him wished she'd stayed a ghost from his past so he wouldn't have to reopen wounds he'd worked so hard to scar over. Harper moved toward the passenger side door, fingertips tracing the curve of the window. "This car was my dad's dream," she said. "Before everything went wrong. Before he got sick. I spent years trying to buy it back after it was auctioned off with the rest of our things. When I finally did, I didn't know where to send it. I only knew who would understand what it meant." He stared at her, the Mustang, the history that refused to stay buried. "So you sent it to remind me of you?" he asked. She shook her head. "I sent it because I wanted to fix something real. Something that mattered once. Maybe the only thing I can still salvage." His heart stuttered, betraying him. He didn't want to feel hope. Not now. Not with her. But her voice had that same tremor he remembered from the nights they'd sat on his truck's tailgate, dreaming about futures that had never happened. Harper finally met his eyes again, vulnerability laid bare. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. I didn't want the past between us to stay broken forever." Ethan swallowed hard. He didn't know if anything could be restored, not her trust, not his, not the decade they'd lost. But as he looked at her and then at the Mustang waiting on the lift, something unspoken shifted in the space between them, something tentative, fragile, and still alive. Before he could respond, Harper whispered, barely audible, "Tell me where to start."